So it's some ungodly hour. Was it before 5 a.m. and on my way to pick up the first bike that's going to be added to the garage. Got my lucky banana with me, so I'm sure this trip will go well. We're off to catch the 6:30 a.m. ferry.
This is Rod Rides and Wrenches. Obviously, my name is Rod, and I want to give you a big shout out for your help in the channel's community section. As you know, when I sold my 2012 Goldwing a couple of weeks ago, I was immediately on the hunt to replace it with a new bike. Your encouragement and feedback in the community section was all of the enabling support that I needed to go fill that vacant 24 square feet in the garage with a new, or at least new to me, bike. If you haven't figured it out yet, I really do have a problem with owning just one or two or three or four motorcycles at a time.
Take the best orgasm you ever had, multiply it by 1,000 and you're still nowhere near it.
This time, however, I was on the hunt for something a little bit different. I am surrounded by beautiful forest roads and logging trails. Now, I've had this idea in my head to go find a real adventure bike, something that I could ride in the spring and in the fall and, you know, really get out there into the backwoods a little bit. To that end, I found and purchased the ultimate adventure bike, one with low kilometers that needed a little help because of some neglect by the former owner. This bike was on Vancouver Island, so I loaded up and headed out to the ferry to make the 2-hour trip up island. Pretty much any bike that I buy is going to need somewhere between a little and a lot of work. This bike falls somewhere in between, and this helped me keep within my motorcycle purchase budget of under $5,000. After some careful negotiations, wound up costing about half that much. And if you want some negotiation ammo for the next time that you go and buy a used bike, be sure to check out this video, which will walk you through some of the checks that you can do to a bike that you're prospectively buying or one that you already own. Checking out a bike like this when you go to buy it shows the prospective seller that you know what you're talking about. And if you're handy, can help you negotiate a lower price.
And it's just that simple. So remember, women don't find you handsome. They should at least find you handy.
So here it is, the ultimate adventure bike, my new to me 2013 KLR 650. Although the second generation KLR doesn't get the reverence the first gen KLRs do for off-road purists, there is no disputing the second generation KLR is the most popular true adventure bike in the world. Now, my KLR does need some work, and we'll get to that in another video, because after purchasing one of the least powerful motorcycles that Kawasaki makes for full-grown adults, I had to buy one of the most powerful bikes Kawasaki has ever made. So this is the bike we're going to take a look at today, since it's going to take a minimal amount of effort to keep it rideable for the rest of the season. The bike I'm talking about, of course, is this 2008 Kawasaki ZX14 Ninja, or as it's known in the rest of the world, a ZZR 1400. Now, this bike was also on Vancouver Island, so after boarding the ferry by foot, I was able to walk off and up to my new Kawasaki ZX14 and ride it back. This Kawasaki ZX14 was an absolute steal at $4,600, since comparable bikes that were 2006 and 2007 models were actually priced higher, and in some cases with higher mileage. Now, the 2006 and 2007, although they were the most powerful bikes made in those years, did suffer some from crank bearing issues. So you want to stay away from those bikes if you can. The 2008 was one of the best years to buy a ZX14 from a purist standpoint. No fancy electronics to get in the way, just you and a roughly 200 horsepower motor. The only restrictions that are on the bike is a self-imposed by Kawasaki speed limit of 186 miles per hour. This, by the way, can be overcome by modifying the speed sprocket sensor, but that's a story for another time. Today, I want to go through the bike and make sure it won't cause me any grief this summer while riding it some long distance. The first thing I wanted to tackle on this ZX14 is this awful gash on the right side of the bike. Now, according to the fellow I bought it from, the first owner of the bike had it fall over or pushed over in a parking lot or driveway, and the lower and right side of the cowl got scratched up. Now, the one thing that I have never heard anyone admitting to was that they were the one that dropped the bike. It's always the guy who owned it before them, or a buddy, or someone who was riding it, or some other act of God or that resulted in the damage to the bike. Now, I'm not saying that this very nice former owner of this Kawasaki was lying. I'm just saying that in all the bikes that I've ever bought secondhand, I have never gotten to meet the person who was responsible for the damage. And we really need to remove the stigma around this so men everywhere can just admit they were the one that was riding the bike when it fell over. Now, these scratches are pretty deep and extend up the cowl, so I took my power polisher to them. They cleaned up a little bit, but there's no way these were ever coming out of the paint.
I think this one's a bit of a lost cause.
The paint and a fair amount of the plastic has been scratched away. Here you can see the depth of the Kawasaki paint and the metallic flake in it. Now, I'm not going to trust this to a local body or paint guy to fix. Maybe I should just get a complete aftermarket fairing and change the color of the bike. And I always thought that these look good in green and black, and that would match my 600 Ninja. Or I can still order these painted parts directly from Kawasaki. Now, they are pricey, but there wouldn't be a color match issue. If you have any thoughts on this, why not put it in the comments section? I'd love to hear your feedback. While I had my power polisher out, I hit up some of the other areas on the fairing, as well as the headlights and the original windscreen to bring their clarity back and remove that dull, cloudy look on the plastic. The next thing I wanted to check was the air cleaner. Now, the former owner wasn't sure what type of air cleaner was in the bike, whether it was a paper element or a high flow like a K&N. This told me that despite him being kind enough to change the oil and oil filter before selling it to me, he never serviced the air cleaner, which on a monster motor like this needs to be done regularly.
Moment of truth here. The former owner couldn't tell me the last time this was serviced, what type of filter was in here. And that's probably why.
Sure enough, the air filter isn't flowing much air. I ordered a K&N filter and replaced it and installed the new filter. Now, this is the first K&N filter I've ever had to use sealing grease on the sides. I guess the K&N engineers felt that the rubber seal on the filter isn't good enough with the Ninja's ram air intake and that massive gulp capacity for oxygen. After taking off the fairings to get at the air cleaner and inspect the rest of the bike, I found a significant oil leak on the front of the engine, which appears to be coming from the valve cover. Searching the ZX14 forums, I found that this is a fairly common problem on them and the GTR 1400 concourse. Thinking I had to replace the gasket, I found a video explaining the problem on, you guessed it, YouTube, and how to inexpensively fix my leaking Ninja. The 1400 motor has this odd bolt pattern on the valve cover, with 4 bolts on the right side of the motor and only 2 bolts holding down the left. As you have probably figured out, the engine is leaking from the left side. No matter how much torquing you do, you can't get the valve cover tight enough to properly seal the motor, and based on comments I've read in forums, you shouldn't go near these bolts without a torque wrench, since a number of would-be fixers broke their valve cover bolts off in the head, which I would guess would make for a horrible experience having to drop the engine out of the bike to get at the cylinder head, all the while hoping you don't fuck anything up with the said cylinder head getting these bolts out. The issue here, besides the offset bolt pattern though, is the shoulders on the valve cover bolts, preventing the cover from being squeezed down. To get around this, you just need 6 washers about the same size as the machined head on the valve cover bolts. Before taking on this, however, I did take the bike out of the garage and degrease and pressure wash the oil from the engine. This leads me to my first recommendation. My recommendation to you, avoid high pressure water anywhere near your 1400 Kawasaki. The waterproof wiring harness connectors and plug coil seals on the ZX14 are about as effective as a knitted condom. Unfortunately, I had to learn this the only way I seem to know how, the hard way. Installing the washers is a pretty straightforward job after you pull the radiator forward, remove the top engine mounts, throttle cables, pair systems, peel back this ridiculous rubber heat shield, this stupid thing, out of the way. Now seriously, if you are watching this and own a ZX14, have you removed this heat shield? And other than making your bike much easier to work on down the road, did it make any difference? I would love to hear from you. I torqued the valve bolts with their new washers down to 8 Newton meters first, and then to the prescribed 9.8 Newton meters or 87 inch-pounds on a second round. A viewer asked me a couple of months ago if a torque wrench is really necessary for working on motorcycles. So I told him straight up, No, not at all, as long as you're good at drilling out broken bolts and taking 5 times as long to complete a job. You're good to go with that claw hammer in your hand and a crescent wrench. Now, just another lesson I referred to earlier that I'm going to let him experience on his own time. This oil leak repair led to the next discovery on the ZX14. But another problem cropped up. That's what holds the header pipe onto the engine. And the studs are there. That's the good news. But this job got a little bit more detailed, as in order to get in there, I probably have to at least loosen the radiator, if not take it off entirely. There was actually a number of loose nuts and bolts on the motor. The throttle body boot clamps were also in need of tightening. After pressure washing the dirt and oil away from the throttle bodies, I'm sure we had a seal leak, which I found while tracing down and drying out my wet connectors. The good news is that I definitely had to move the radiator off the mounts to get the torque wrench in at the header bolts, which gave me more than enough room to get my thick hands around the spark plugs and coils and valve cover bolts. The spark plugs were gapped correctly still, so they went back in the bike. Before removing them though, I blew compressed air into the holes on the top of the motor to get as much corrosion and any other crap that was down there out of the holes.
Took the coil pack out to find a bunch of crud around the seal on this cylinder. Nasty.
While the bike was on the hoist, there were a number of other maintenance jobs that needed to be done. I cleaned the switch housing with WD-40. The clutch lever was really dragging and didn't quite feel right. Removing the pivot bolt showed me exactly why. Cleaning this bolt up and lubricating it with some grease made it feel like new. The throttle cables had to be disconnected to get to the top of the motor on the left side, so they were cleaned and lubricated and are now smoother than Kim Kardashian's pubic region. When I went to check the oil level on the bike, I noticed it was high. I mentioned that the fellow I bought the bike from had just changed the oil and oil filter, and having too much oil in your bike can lead to issues like making a mess of your airbox, to blowing out an engine seal, or even the oil sight glass. So I relieved about a half liter of oil from the bike by loosening the oil filter. Now, I would rather have a bike that's just under the top mark on the sight glass than one that's over full on that mark, especially one that's capable of high RPM.
Well, that was a quick roll on to 100 miles an hour without too much effort.
After inspecting the brakes and putting the bike back together, all that was left was to take her out for a rip.
Just go for a rip. Just go for a rip. Are you butt? Just go for a rip.
So one of the things that's interesting about the ZX14 is it doesn't handle like a huge bike. I would say that there are a lot of other bikes that certainly feel the size of this bike without having the displacement or the power. But for a big bike, it's certainly one of the easiest bikes to ride from a handling standpoint. There's not a whole lot of effort taken to make the bike turn or corner. I always found that my K1300 SP seemed to take a lot of effort to make it turn the way you wanted it to. You had to really put your body into it. The ZX14, way less effort. You can just simply steer the bike where you want to go. But the one thing you can't deny about the bike is just the sheer amount of power that it has. Now, I've ridden other 200 horsepower machines before, Panigale 1199, BMW S1000 HP, Hayabusa. I mean, not really a stranger to high horsepower stuff, but this bike is mine, and the whole point of it is to really start to get comfortable with the bike and figure out what the capabilities of it are. Well, I feel the need for speed.
Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more. Remember, I still have to get back to that KLR 650 that I showed you at the beginning, and we'll start tearing into that bike very soon on Rod, Rides, and Wrenches. Until next time, whatever you do ride, be sure to ride safe.